It was a dark and stormy night when Clara decided to return to her hometown, a small village isolated from the rest of the world. After years of living in the big city, fate brought her back to care for her sick mother. The air in the village had always been thick, filled with dark stories about spirits that wandered the night. But Clara had never believed them. Until now. Arriving at the old family home, a decaying colonial mansion, she felt the weight of an oppressive atmosphere. The wind howled through the trees surrounding the house, and dry leaves were swept across the path. The front door was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her. With cautious hands, Clara pushed it open and entered the dark hallway, feeling a chill run down her spine. Shadows danced on the walls, as if they had a life of their own. Her mother was in the living room, sitting in an old leather chair. Her eyes, once bright with vitality, now seemed empty, lifeless, as if something was slowly consuming her. Seeing her, Clara noticed her mother was mumbling something unintelligible. Her voice was low, barely audible, as if she were talking to someone or something. "Mom?" Clara called out, hesitantly approaching. The old woman's eyes slowly turned to her daughter, but she didn't seem to recognize her. A cold smile formed on her trembling lips, and suddenly, without warning, she began to laugh. A hollow, disturbing laugh that echoed through the house, sending chills down Clara's arms. "They are here," the old woman whispered, her voice shaky. "They never left." Confused and worried, Clara knelt beside her mother, holding her cold, trembling hand. "Who's here, Mom? What are you talking about?" But before her mother could answer, a loud crash echoed through the house. The walls shook, and a series of violent bangs seemed to come from upstairs. Clara jumped to her feet, alarmed, and ran toward the stairs. But something stopped her. A feeling of absolute dread washed over her. That sound. It wasn't natural. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Reluctantly, Clara climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat in her heart. The hallway was plunged into darkness, except for the faint flicker of an old chandelier swaying slightly from the ceiling. The sound was louder now, as if someone was desperately pounding on one of the doors. As she approached the end of the hallway, she saw that the door to the bedroom where she had slept as a child was slightly open. A cold, repulsive breeze seeped through it, and a stench of rot made her gag. With a trembling hand, Clara pushed the door open, revealing the dusty room, almost untouched, as if no one had entered for years. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. In the center of the room stood a full-length mirror. Not just any mirror, but an old and ornate one with detailed golden frames. Clara didn't remember that mirror. It hadn't been there before. But as she gazed at her reflection, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The reflection didn't match her movements. While she remained still, her image in the mirror tilted its head in a disturbing manner, as if studying her. Suddenly, the reflection smiled. Not a normal smile, but a grotesque one, with lips stretching far beyond what was humanly possible. Clara took a step back, her heart racing. But before she could react, something happened. A cadaverous hand emerged from the mirror, reaching toward her with long, deformed fingers. Clara stumbled, tripping over a chair, but the hand kept coming out of the mirror, followed by a skeletal body covered in rotting flesh. Its eyes were empty, yet Clara felt the cold, unfeeling gaze upon her. With slow, dragging movements, the creature advanced toward her, emitting a guttural sound like wind blowing through a cave. Desperate, Clara ran out of the room and down the stairs as fast as she could. When she reached the ground floor, she found her mother standing in the center of the room, but something about her had changed. Her eyes were completely black, and a twisted smile hung on her face. "They want you, Clara." Her voice was now a blend of many others, as if countless people were speaking at once. "You can't escape. No one escapes." Suddenly, the house began to shake violently. The walls warped, as if pushed by invisible forces. The banging sounds returned, louder and deafening. Clara tried to run to the front door, but it wouldn't budge, as if it were sealed by some unknown power. The space around her started to shift. The walls filled with dark stains, as if evil itself was spreading through the house. Whispering voices filled the air, coming from all directions, laughing and muttering terrible things. Clara was trapped. There was nowhere to run. She turned to her mother, but the figure standing before her was no longer human. Her mother's face was contorting, constantly changing form, as if multiple faces were overlapping, each more grotesque than the last. Her black eyes gleamed with a malevolent light. "You made the wrong choice," the creature hissed. Clara backed away, feeling more desperate by the second. Her heart pounded, her breathing was ragged, and tears streamed down her face. She knew this wasn't real. It couldn't be. But everything around her said otherwise. It was as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. She shut her eyes tightly, trying to focus, trying to block out the fear, but the voices grew louder, closer. She felt cold fingers brush against her skin, like invisible hands grabbing her. A cold laugh echoed in her ears, and then, suddenly, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. Clara opened her eyes slowly and realized she was alone. The house was quiet, immersed in complete darkness. There was no sign of her mother or the creatures. For a moment, she thought it had all been a hallucination, perhaps brought on by stress and exhaustion. But then, as she looked at the floor, she froze in fear. There were deep claw marks gouged into the wooden floor, as if something had tried to claw its way out from the depths of the house. In the center of the room, an indistinct figure stood, tall and hooded, its eyes glowing in the darkness. And then, Clara understood. She was no longer in the world of the living. The house, her mother, the creatures, they were all part of something much larger and more sinister. She had crossed a boundary without realizing it. She was trapped in the world of the dead, and the spirits that dwelled there had been waiting for her. She felt the fear shift into a grim acceptance as the hooded figure silently approached. As the darkness finally consumed her, the last thing Clara heard were the eternal whispers of those who never managed to leave that cursed place. Clara was now one of them.